It began like any ordinary day, clear skies, a cool breeze rustling through the towering pines of Mount Rainier National Park. The Skyline Trail, one of the most visited paths in the Pacific Northwest, bustled with hikers, families, and amateur photographers pausing to capture fields of wildflowers under the shadow of the mountain's snow-capped peak. But around noon, something happened. Something that would be whispered about for years, though never fully explained. Jason Hull, a senior park ranger with over 12 years of experience, was making his usual rounds. He was well known by visitors, often stopping to answer questions, point out mountain goat sightings, or share facts about the terrain. That day, he had been spotted helping a group of hikers near the Panorama Point lookout. Several tourists later recalled seeing him smile, adjust his wide-brimmed ranger hat, and walk calmly toward a nearby tree line just a few feet off the main trail. And then, nothing. He did not return. Within minutes, people were looking for him. At first, it was confusion. Maybe he was responding to an animal sighting or checking on a side path. But as the minutes turned to hours and no radio calls were made, concern set in. Rangers scoured the area. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs were brought in to track his scent. Yet everything led back to that same place, a quiet patch of woods less than 30 yards from the busiest trail in the park. Jason Hall was never seen again. No signs of struggle, no body, no clues, just a stillness that settled over the trees as if they had swallowed him whole. This is not a ghost story. These disappearances are not legends passed down by campfire or exaggerated through generations. They are real, documented. Names, dates, evidence, or the unsettling lack of it. And they are not isolated. Across the United States, hundreds of people vanish in national parks every year. Some are recovered. Others are found days or weeks later, in places that make no sense, miles from where they disappeared, with no sign of how they traveled such distances without food, water, or shelter. And then there are the cases that remain open, cold, unresolved. People who stepped into the forest and never came back. What makes these disappearances even more disturbing is what is missing from the official record. You might assume the National Park Service keeps detailed statistics about missing persons in their jurisdiction. You would be wrong. There is no centralized database, no master list. In many cases, the responsibility of investigation is passed to local authorities, or even quietly dropped if the person is not found within a certain time frame. Families searching for answers often run into dead ends, bureaucratic silence, or vague reassurances. Author and former police detective David Paulides has spent over a decade investigating these incidents. Through his work in the Missing 411 Project, he has uncovered hundreds of baffling cases that fit an eerily similar pattern: sudden disappearances, extreme weather following the incident, missing time, dogs unable to track, and victims often found near bodies of water, boulder fields, or in locations previously searched. Take this in. There are currently over 1,600 officially unsolved disappearances in America's national parks. And those are just the ones we know about. So what is going on? Skeptics are quick to blame human error, poor planning, fatigue, injury, exposure. And in many cases, that is true. The wilderness can be cruel to those who underestimate it, but there are disappearances that do not make sense. Ones involving experienced hikers, survivalists, park rangers, people like Jason Hall. What do you say when a seasoned ranger vanishes on a sunny day, within earshot of dozens of witnesses and leaves no trace? What do you believe when bodies turn up in places that were already searched, untouched by weather or wildlife, as if returned? What do you make of the silence? Because that is the one constant. In these cases, the forest never speaks. No matter how many questions are asked, how many footprints are traced, how many hours are logged with binoculars and bloodhounds and thermal drones, the woods do not answer. Instead, they wait. As you listen to these stories, you might feel that silence pressing in too. You may notice a pattern, a shape, a truth beginning to form not from what is said, but from what is absent. In the episodes ahead, we will walk through the stories of those who disappeared, one by one. You will hear about gear found neatly folded beside untouched rivers, children who vanish and reappear without memory, climbers who wake up miles away with no sign of injury, and families who never stop asking what happened to the person they loved. But before we begin, take this with you. When you enter the forest, not every trail leads back. Sometimes, the forest does not take a life. Sometimes, it takes presence a person's place in the world, removed so quietly that the world barely notices. So ask yourself, if you stepped off the trail right now, would anyone be able to follow? The forest does not forget. It simply waits for you to. Jason Hole was not the kind of man who made mistakes in the wilderness. For more than 10 years, he had patrolled the dense forests, meadows, and treacherous slopes of Mount Rainier National Park. He was one of the most seasoned rangers in the western sector, a man with an almost instinctive understanding of the landscape and its hidden rhythms. He was respected by his colleagues, loved by his family, and trusted by the tourists who passed through the park. On August 12, 1999, Jason left the ranger station for what was supposed to be a routine patrol on the Skyline Trail. He never returned. The Skyline Trail is no obscure footpath. It is one of the most heavily trafficked and well-maintained routes in the entire park, winding through breathtaking alpine meadows with panoramic views of Mount Rainier's snow-capped peak. That day, the weather was perfect. Bright sun lit up the meadows, the trails buzzed with hikers, and visibility was excellent. Jason was there to inspect trail, signage, check on boardwalk conditions, and ensure tourists were respecting the vegetation. Several hikers reported seeing him along the way. He greeted them warmly, warned them about wildlife, and carried himself with the same calm professionalism he always had. Then, just after 3:00 p.m., a couple from Texas saw something strange. Jason was standing still, just off the trail looking into the tree line. He did not appear alarmed, just thoughtful. Then he walked slowly into the woods and disappeared behind a line of fir trees. That moment was the last confirmed sighting of Jason Hole. When Jason did not report back that evening, fellow rangers tried reaching him on the radio. No response. By nightfall, they grew concerned. Rangers retraced the Skyline Trail with flashlights, calling his name, expecting maybe a twisted ankle or a broken radio. But there were no signs, no cries for help, no dropped gear, no indication that anything had gone wrong. The next morning, a full search operation was launched. Dozens of trained personnel and volunteers combed the area. Search dogs followed Jason's scent to the same point on the trail, then stopped. One dog reportedly circled in place, sniffed, then sat down as if it had lost the trail entirely. Helicopters scanned the woods and meadows from above. Nothing. No heat signatures. No movement. This was not a deep wilderness off-trail disappearance. Jason had vanished in broad daylight on a busy trail with hundreds of people around. No one had heard a scream. No one saw a struggle. There were no signs of disorientation or distress. The area was not particularly rugged, nor was the weather a factor. Rangers who knew Jason personally were baffled. He did not take unnecessary risks. He carried a working radio. He knew not to stray far from marked trails. Days passed. The search expanded, yet the silence of the forest remained unbroken. Then, 2 weeks later, a discovery was made 3 miles from the last known sighting. A pack of search dogs led their handlers to a small clearing beneath a weathered old tree. There, arranged neatly on the forest floor, were Jason's jacket, water flask, his ranger-issued notebook, and a handheld radio. The placement of the items was unsettling. They were not scattered, as if dropped during a struggle. They were not hidden, as if stashed by someone fleeing the scene. They were laid out deliberately. The jacket folded, the notebook closed, the radio turned off. Even more disturbing were the stains on the fabric of the jacket. At first, it was assumed to be blood. A full forensic analysis followed, but the results only deepened the mystery. The blood was not human. It was of animal origin, though officials never clarified which species. The official report merely stated non-human, unidentified animal blood. If Jason had been attacked by a wild animal, there would have been other signs: torn fabric, footprints, claw marks, remains. But there was nothing. No blood trail, no drag marks, no signs of a fight. Equally baffling was the location. The clearing was not near any trail, and the surrounding terrain was uneven and thick with undergrowth. Yet there were no tracks leading in or out. No bent grass, no broken branches, no footprints, human or animal. The dogs found the spot, but no trail to it, as if the items had simply appeared there. Some suggested that Jason, disoriented or injured, may have wandered off and eventually succumbed to the elements. But that raised more questions than it answered. Why would he remove his jacket and radio? Why was there no sign of his body nearby? Why did his scent disappear so abruptly and completely? Others whispered of something stranger. The term missing time began surfacing in conversations among off-duty rangers. Stories of other strange disappearances, some dating back decades, quietly circulated. People vanishing just off the trail, only to be found in places they should never have reached. Some even mentioned the idea of thin places, locations in nature, where the boundary between dimensions or realities is unusually weak. These were not theories the National Park Service entertained publicly. But for those closest to the case, the possibilities began to shift from the rational to the inexplicable. One ranger, speaking anonymously, said, "It felt like he stepped out of sync with the world. One minute he was here, and the next, he just Forrest's man." Haliev was not. Over the years, Jason's family continued searching. His wife refused to believe he was simply gone. His children, now grown, returned to Mount Rainier every summer, leaving notes along the Skyline Trail. "Come home, Dad," one reads, tied gently to a tree limb near the spot he was last seen. The official case remains open but dormant. No new evidence has surfaced. No sightings. No remains. Just that clearing in the woods, that pile of gear, and a void where a man used to be. What happened to Jason Hall? Was it an accident cloaked in coincidence? A calculated act by an unknown hand? Or did he encounter something beyond explanation? Something that exists at the very edge of our understanding? Some believe nature is silent. Others know better, because the forest does not forget. It just does not speak. It was a warm spring morning in Tyler State Park, Pennsylvania. The sunlight flickered across the surface of Neshaminy Creek, a meandering body of water that sliced through the forest with gentle bends and quiet ripples. Birds called out from the treetops. Leaves rustled softly in the breeze. It was the kind of day that made everything feel safe, predictable, familiar. But by the end of that same day, one of the park's most experienced rangers would vanish, without a splash, without a cry, without a trace. Aleph Campbell, 38 years old, had spent the past 9 years patrolling the waters and woods of Tyler Park. He was known for his quiet demeanor and almost obsessive attention to detail. He knew the creek better than anyone, its seasonal patterns, its dangerous bends, its hidden debris. On May 14, 2025, he launched his solo kayak patrol at sunrise. His route was simple: follow the creek south for a few miles, inspect common tourist stops along the shore, then return before noon. He never came back. By 1:00 p.m., when Aleph failed to check in, another ranger grew concerned. Calls to his radio went unanswered. At first, there was no panic. Maybe his battery died. Maybe he had stopped to help someone and lost track of time. But then reports started coming in from hikers. An empty yellow kayak had been spotted along the edge of the river, caught at a shallow bend near a sandy outcrop. A rescue team was dispatched immediately. They found the kayak within minutes. It was not capsized, but it leaned heavily on one side, its nose wedged awkwardly in the sand. The most disturbing detail: the small engine attached to the back was still humming, idling quietly like it had been waiting for someone to return. Inside the boat were Aleph's belongings: his life jacket, backpack, water bottle, a snack bar still in its wrapper, his radio all neatly placed and undisturbed. Nothing was scattered. Nothing was wet. There was no indication of a struggle, no sign he had slipped or fallen. Just an empty kayak, and the absence of a man who should have been there. If Aleph had fallen into the creek, logic dictated that some trace would remain. A wet jacket, a shoe, a scuff on the boat. But there was nothing. The boat had not capsized. His gear was not floating downstream. The current was strong that day, but not violent. The creek, although swelled slightly from spring runoff, was not considered dangerous, especially to someone with Aleph's skill. Rescue boats were deployed immediately. Drones with thermal imaging scanned the waters. Divers searched submerged areas. Every twist and turn of the creek, for 6 miles downstream, was combed. Nothing. Dogs were brought to the scene. They caught Aleph's scent at the boat, but lost it almost instantly. They paced in circles, barked at the trees, and returned to their handlers. Confused, one of the handlers noted, it was like he got out of the boat and just evaporated. The search continued for days. Teams scanned the creek banks, dragging nets through the water, looking for anything, a piece of clothing, a scratch on the rocks, a sign that he had made it to shore. But the ground along the creek was untouched. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of anyone climbing out of the water. Rangers started to question the sequence of events. If Aleph had fallen into the water, how had his kayak drifted so gently to the shore and gotten stuck? Why had the engine still been running? Why were all of his belongings perfectly dry and undisturbed? If someone had ambushed him, would not there be signs? And if he had chosen to disappear, why leave behind everything he needed to survive? As the hours turned to days, frustration turned to disbelief. By the end of the week, park officials had exhausted every reasonable theory. The official narrative settled on presumed drowned, but behind closed doors, no one believed it. Even in cases of accidental drowning, bodies or personal effects surface. Even when someone vanishes into deep water, nature leaves clues. But Aleph's disappearance was too clean, too controlled. Some speculated that he had a psychological break, perhaps an undiagnosed condition, or sudden trauma that led him to walk away from his life. But those who knew him rejected the idea. Aleph had no history of depression or erratic behavior. He loved his job. He had just bought a house. He had made plans for a fishing trip the following weekend. Nothing about his life suggested he wanted to disappear. Others whispered darker possibilities. That someone else had been there. That maybe Aleph had stumbled upon someone he should not have. A hidden camp. A poacher. Something illegal. But if that were the case, where was the evidence? Why was there no struggle? Why was everything so silent? There is something especially disturbing about water disappearances. Rivers, lakes, and oceans are unpredictable. They can hide things. But this creek, this day, it was not big enough or fast enough to make someone vanish without a ripple. Not like this. The details nod at those closest to the case. Why was the engine still running if Aleph was not in the kayak? Why was not anything wet or moved? And how did someone just disappear into thin air? On a river they knew intimately. In the months that followed, the creek was searched again. No bones, no clothing, no remains, nothing. Eventually, the search was scaled back. Aleph Campbell was declared missing, presumed deceased. But everyone involved in the investigation admitted privately they had no idea what happened. To this day, some rangers refuse to patrol Neshaminy Creek alone. Not because they believe in monsters or ghosts, but because they know what silence can mean. They know what it feels like when a scene is too perfect. When a kayak rests quietly at the water's edge, engine humming, life jacket folded, and the person who is supposed to be there is just gone. The wilderness does not always answer. Sometimes it just takes. The storm had rolled in fast that night. Wind roared through the towering sequoias like a freight train, rattling branches and sending sheets of rain slapping against the forest floor. Lightning cracked above the mountains, splitting the sky with blinding light. Rangers were on high alert. Weather like this could trap hikers, wash out trails, and spark landslides. It was the kind of night that made seasoned park staff double-check their gear and stay close to the radios. But not Andrew Holland. At 42 years old, Andrew was not just another ranger. He was one of the most experienced in Sequoia National Park. He had a reputation for being thorough, focused, and always prepared. He did not just do the job, he lived it. His colleagues respected him. Visitors remembered him. And yet, on the night of September 9th, 1993, he drove into the storm and disappeared without a trace. The next morning, after the worst of the storm had passed, a fellow ranger on patrol noticed a strange sight along a narrow maintenance road that cut through a remote part of the park. A government-issued vehicle sat parked at the side of the road, engine still running, headlights casting long beams into the mist. Rainwater trickled in shallow streams along the ground, but the tires had not moved. There were no skid marks, no sign of sudden braking. The car looked calm, unbothered. But inside, it was empty. The driver's seat was vacant. The doors were locked. On the front seat sat a folded rain jacket, a map of the park with a single line drawn in pen. and a handheld radio still turned on. The map was odd. Marked trail was not on any official documentation. It veered off the known path, deep into a section of forest rarely visited, with no official name and no recorded trails. No one else had known Andrew was planning to patrol that area. There was no note, no distress call, no sign of a scuffle or emergency. The car had fuel, the battery was fine, and the engine was not overheated. The lights were on. The wipers were paused mid-swipe. It was as if Andrew had simply stepped out mid-thought and never returned. Search efforts began immediately. Dozens of rangers spread out from the location of the vehicle, combing the surrounding woods. Helicopters scanned from above. Dogs were brought in. They picked up Andrew's scent near the driver's side door, but quickly lost it less than 50 yards into the forest. The underbrush was damp, but undisturbed. No broken branches. No footprints. No dropped gear. Volunteers pushed deeper into the unmarked zone that Andrew had highlighted on the map. It was rough terrain, dense, uneven, shadowed by enormous sequoia trunks and thick fog. Visibility was poor, and compass readings grew unreliable. Some reported their devices spinning without clear direction. Others spoke of sudden disorientation, nausea, and an eerie silence that seemed to press down on the forest, muffling all sound. Days passed. The trail grew cold. No signs of a fall, an attack, or an animal encounter. No torn clothing, no bones, no campsite. Just the sound of wind and the memory of a ranger who knew better than to go unprepared. One theory floated among the team. Maybe he would seen lights in the woods, unfamiliar, silent, inexplicable lights. It is not unheard of in the park. Other rangers, hikers, even scientists have reported glowing orbs hovering in the trees or darting between the hills. No one could explain them. Most chalked it up to optical illusions, swamp gas, or electromagnetic disturbances. But some wondered if those lights lured him off the road. If Andrew had seen something that compelled him to step away, something outside normal reason, it might explain why he left the engine running, why he did not turn off the lights, and why he did not grab his radio. Maybe it happened fast. Maybe he did not even know he was walking away. Or maybe he thought he would only be gone a moment. The fact that he would draw on a trail on the map that did not exist in any official records added another layer of mystery. Had he learned of it from someone, found it himself years ago? Was it something he had been meaning to explore, or something he had seen before and had not spoken of? Colleagues quietly spoke of a time, months before the incident, when Andrew had mentioned hearing voices on his radio voices that did not match any known call signs. Faint whispers, static-filled, that would cut in and out late at night while he patrolled alone. He would joked about it once, calling them ghost frequencies, but his eyes had told a different story. After that, he would begun mapping his own version of the park, with red marks, notes, and tiny X's in places no one else understood. When the search was finally called off, after 2 weeks, the only official record was this: Andrew Holland, park ranger, missing while on duty. Last known location, his vehicle. No known injury. No foul play suspected. No official trail beyond the road. But to those who searched for him, the incident was far from normal. Something had happened in those woods. Something that left no sign, no struggle, and no time to react. Some believe he wandered into a pocket of the forest where the rules of nature do not apply. Others think he may have stepped into one of those thin places where time bends and space folds. Places where reality flickers. Whatever the truth, Andrew Holland never came back. And his truck, the engine running, the radio humming softly, remains one of the eeriest crime scenes in park history. Sometimes, the most terrifying part of a disappearance is not the violence. It is the stillness that follows. The unfinished story. The vehicle left idling in the dark, waiting for a driver who is no longer there. It was early April 2017 when Jacob Gray pedaled into Olympic National Park, the thick coastal forest rising on both sides of the narrow road. At 22 years old, Jacob was in peak physical shape, lean, strong, and deeply connected to nature. He had grown up with a love for the wild, often disappearing into the mountains for days at a time with nothing but a tent and a bow. He was not careless, he was not naive, he was a survivalist, prepared, focused, determined. On the morning of April 6th, Jacob rode out along Sawduck Hot Springs Road, pulling a small trailer behind his bicycle, loaded with camping gear, food supplies, and his favorite recurve bow. He had told no one exactly where he was going, only that he wanted to be alone in the wilderness for a while. He had been struggling with some personal questions lately, craving clarity in a place untouched by noise and distraction. Olympic Park offered that silence. Later that day, a park ranger on patrol noticed something unusual along the side of the road. A bicycle was leaned carefully against a tree. Next to it sat the trailer, upright and undamaged. A few feet away, scattered oddly in the grass, lay Jacob's bow and several arrows. There was no sign of a struggle, no tire marks suggesting urgency. The scene did not feel abandoned. It felt paused, as if someone had stepped away for just a moment and never returned. Inside the trailer, nothing was missing. A tent, sleeping bag, water bottles, food, all there. His ID, wallet, and phone were untouched, but Jacob was gone. At first, rangers thought he had simply wandered off to collect water from the nearby Solduke River. It was a common enough mistake for even experienced hikers to make. Step off trail, misjudge distance, get turned around. But Jacob was not inexperienced, and he did not make casual decisions. If he left his gear behind, it meant he had every intention of coming back. When hours passed without his return, the search began. Day after day, teams fanned out across the forest. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead. The river was dragged, even though the current was low and visibility was high. Not a single footprint was found. No broken branches, no clothing, no campsite. Just silence. The arrows, scattered like a moment frozen in time, remained untouched. Why had he laid them out? Had he seen something in the trees? Was he preparing for something, or had he dropped them in fear? His father, Randy Gray, drove up from California the moment he got the call. He refused to believe his son had simply wandered off and died. Jacob was stronger than that, smarter. He began organizing his own search efforts, putting up flyers, coordinating with volunteers, combing through the terrain inch by inch. Days became weeks, then months, but still nothing. Then, in August 2018, more than a year after Jacob disappeared, a group of volunteers made a grim discovery deep in the mountains near Hoe Lake, 15 miles from where his bicycle had been found. There, in a patch of difficult terrain barely accessible without ropes and serious climbing equipment, they found skeletal remains. Alongside the bones were pieces of clothing and personal items that belonged to Jacob Gray. The location made no sense. The path from where his bike had been to where his body was found was not just remote, it was hostile. Dense brush, sudden elevation gains, slippery ridges, and thick fog. No trail connected the two. It was not the kind of place someone wandered into by mistake. Why had he gone there? And more importantly, how? The medical examiner was unable to determine an exact cause of death. There were no clear signs of trauma, no stab wounds, no blunt force injuries. The bones were mostly intact. He had not been mauled by animals. There were no bullet holes, no clues. It was as if Jacob had simply walked deep into the mountains, laid down, and never got up. Some theorized hypothermia. Others speculated dehydration or exhaustion. But the area he was found in had water sources. It was not cold enough to kill in a single night. And if he had grown weak or lost, why had not he turned back? Why had not he used his gear? Randy Gray never accepted the official silence. He believed his son had seen something that made him run, fast and far. Or something that lured him. Theories began to emerge. Some pointed to Bigfoot legends, common in the Pacific Northwest. Others suggested mental break, perhaps. Jacob snapped, abandoned his rationality, and went into the woods chasing a vision. But none of that explained the condition of his gear. None of it explained the bow and arrows laid out in plain sight. None of it explained how a survivalist made it 15 miles through mountainous wilderness, with no food, no tent, no pack, and left no trace along the way. Even more chilling were the stories from other hikers' accounts that came in long after Jacob's disappearance. Several reported seeing strange lights in that same forest. One group of backpackers described hearing flutes playing at night, far off in the distance. Another claimed they felt like they were being followed by something just out of sight. All anecdotal, all impossible to verify, but unsettling nonetheless. There is a heaviness in that part of the forest, a feeling many describe as being watched. Trees grow thicker there, sound travels differently, and time, somehow, feels off. Minutes stretch, hours vanish. It is as though the land has its own rhythm, one that does not care about maps, or logic, or human life. Jacob Gray's story remains one of the most haunting disappearances in Olympic National Park history, not just because of how he vanished, but because of how he was found, far from where he should have been, with no clear reason, no goodbye, no struggle, just silence. Randy visits the spot every year now. He stands by the tree where the bicycle once leaned and listens to the wind. He says he can still feel Jacob's presence. Not lost. Not gone, just somewhere else, just out of reach. Some disappearances leave clues, others leave echoes. Jacob Gray's left a void, one that no map can explain. It was the end of summer in 1985, and Yellowstone National Park had begun to shed the last traces of tourist season. The air was cooler, the trails quieter. Golden leaves blanketed the paths in crisp rustles, and the sound of wind moving through the trees brought a kind of solemn calm to the wilderness. For Jonathan and Marcus Hill, two brothers from Montana, it was the perfect time for a hike, a final escape into nature before the cold fully set in. They were both experienced in the outdoors. Jonathan, 34, was a geologist with a fascination for rock formations and glacial movement. He carried a backpack full of maps, climbing gear, and a small journal he used to sketch anything unusual. Marcus, 4 years younger, was a journalist for a local paper. Together, they were close not just by blood, but by trust, built over a lifetime of adventures through rugged terrain. Their route that day was the Granite Crest Trail, a relatively isolated 12-mile path that began at Mammoth Hot Springs and climbed through rocky ridgelines, pine-strewn valleys, and wind-swept plateaus. It was not tourist-friendly, and that is exactly why they chose it. They set off at 8:00 a.m., leaving their car parked in an unmarked lot, the only vehicle in sight. For the first few hours, the hike was serene. The sun broke through a patchy, overcast sky, casting golden rays over the alpine grass. They reached a rocky incline around 11:30 a.m. and the trail narrowed, curving steeply along a slope littered with broken granite and fallen fir trees. It was here, near a wide clearing surrounded by skeletal tree trunks, that everything went wrong. Jonathan stopped first. The weight of his backpack was pulling on his shoulders, so he unstrapped it and crouched down to adjust the harness. Marcus, a few feet away, had unpacked a small meal, some bread and a can of tuna. As he opened the can, he glanced toward his brother, expecting to hear one of his usual sarcastic remarks about the smell. But Jonathan was not there. In that single moment, a matter of seconds, he had vanished. His backpack remained on the ground, carefully placed. A water bottle still stood upright. There was no sound, no branches snapping, no footsteps running off into the trees. Just silence. Marcus stood up, called his name. Nothing. He walked in every direction from that spot, scanning the underbrush, shouting louder. Still nothing. What followed was a frantic run down the trail to the nearest ranger post. Search and rescue teams were dispatched within hours. By the next morning, dozens of trained personnel and multiple search dogs combed the area. Helicopters scanned the ridgelines. Everyone expected to find something. Footprints, a piece of clothing, signs of a fall. But there was nothing. The only thing they found was exactly what Marcus had seen, the backpack, sitting neatly, as if Jonathan had planned a return for it. 3 days into the search, hope started to waver. Dogs could pick up no consistent trail. One moment they would follow a faint scent up a slope. The next, they would stop cold and turn in fusion. The terrain was unforgiving, but not impassable. The weather had been clear, visibility was good. So why was there no sign? Then, on the 14th day, a discovery was made, one that only deepened the mystery. A team of experienced climbers, sent to explore the vertical cliff faces east of the ridge, found Jonathan's canteen lying alone on a high ledge nearly 500 feet up. The ledge was not accessible from the trail without technical climbing equipment. There were no ropes, no gear, no climbing chalk, no signs that anyone had scaled the wall. The canteen showed no damage, no blood, no fingerprints other than Jonathan's, no indication it had been thrown or dropped. It was just sitting there quiet, undisturbed on a slab of granite, surrounded by nothing but dust and dry pine needles. There were no boot prints, no evidence of human passage. It was as if the object had been placed there, by nothing at all. Marcus was brought to the site and asked if the canteen belonged to his brother. He recognized it immediately. The red mark along the edge, the dent from a trip years ago. It was his. But even he could not comprehend how it had ended up in such a location. He would later describe what happened that day not as a disappearance, but as a tear in reality. He said it felt like time skipped, like 1 second Jonathan was there and the next. The world had shifted, and the place he had occupied no longer existed. This sense of displacement is something that has been echoed in other high-elevation disappearances. In reports from other parks, Glacier, Denali, Shasta, there are recurring elements. Experienced hikers vanishing within seconds, dogs losing scent trails abruptly, personal belongings turning up in impossible places. Many of these disappearances occur in areas with unique geological or electromagnetic properties. High granite content, unusual mineral veins, shifting magnetic readings. Some researchers have proposed the idea of localized vibrational shifts microzones, where frequencies fluctuate in ways that affect perception, balance, or even consciousness. Though not widely accepted by mainstream science, it is a theory gaining quiet traction among those who study wilderness anomalies. What if, in certain places, under specific conditions, the natural world bends just slightly? What if a vibration, imperceptible to our senses, briefly opens a passage of fold in space, a glitch in terrain, and someone steps through it without knowing? These are not just fantasies whispered in late-night forums. They are built on patterns on data points too strange to ignore. Disappearances that defy logic. Where everything is too quiet, too clean, too precise. In Jonathan Hill's case, there were no signs of animal activity, no weather events that could explain an accident, no human witnesses beyond his brother. Just a man who unstrapped his backpack, crouched down, and never got back up. Today, the Granite Crest Trail remains open. Hikers still walk its curves, still admire the golden crowns of the maples in the fall. But some pause at the clearing near the slope. Some swear they feel it, a chill that does not match the temperature, a pressure in the chest, a strange awareness of being observed. And some, like Marcus, carry the silence with them forever. He wrote later in a personal essay, "Sometimes the mountains keep their secrets. Sometimes they do not take you. They simply take the space you once occupied and erase it. You are not lost. You are just no longer part of the map. There is no plaque, no marker along the trail. Just the memory of a man who disappeared in perfect silence, and a family who still hikes the ridge each year, hoping the forest will give back what it once claimed." It was a bright, warm afternoon in Shenandoah National Park, the kind of day when sunlight filtered through centuries-old oak trees, and the breeze danced over the grass like a gentle lullaby. The Thompson family, Michael, Lisa, and their 8-year-old son Jacob, had driven up from Richmond to enjoy a quiet weekend picnic. It was supposed to be a break from the noise of the world. A small, open clearing beside a shallow creek had caught their eye, surrounded by trees and the faint hum of bird song. They unpacked their chairs, set up a folding table, and laid out a simple lunch. Jacob, full of energy, darted around the area, tossing stones into the stream, collecting pine cones, and pretending his stick was a lightsaber. Lisa called out playfully for him to stay close. He waved back with a grin, his go-blue baseball cap slightly tilted on his head. It was just another family day, harmless, happy. Around 1:15 p.m., Michael and Lisa decided to take a short walk down a nearby trail, just 20 minutes, to explore a little. Their neighbor, an older gentleman who had been picnicking nearby, with a book and binoculars, agreed to keep an eye on Jacob. It was not unusual. The clearing was quiet, safe, and surrounded by wide open space. You could see across it from one end to the other. There was nothing threatening here. Nothing strange. Just peace. At 1:40 p.m., the Thompsons returned. What they found was silence. The clearing was empty. Their folding table stood undisturbed, the plates of sandwiches untouched. And on one of the chairs, Jacob's chair, sat his baseball cap, placed neatly on the seat cushion. Nothing else. No toys. No crumbs. No sign of movement. The neighbor looked confused. He said he would look away for just a moment, maybe a minute, and when he turned back, Jacob was gone. He thought the boy had run toward the creek again, or maybe followed his parents up the path. But no, Jacob had vanished. Lisa screamed his name. Michael sprinted toward the stream. They both ran in opposite directions, calling, searching, hoping he had just wandered out of sight. Other visitors joined in quickly. Someone dialed park rangers. Within 30 minutes, an official search had begun. The area was combed systematically. Canines were brought in. Every inch of the nearby forest, creekside, and thickets was scanned. Nothing. No footprints, no pieces of clothing, no broken branches or drag marks. The only thing they found was that hat sitting upright, untouched, like it had been placed there with care. For 4 days, the search radius expanded. The dogs caught a scent trail near the edge of the clearing but lost it within 20 meters. Helicopters scanned the treetops. Rescue divers combed the nearby creek, even though it was too shallow and slow to pose any real danger. Volunteers walked the trails, calling his name from dawn to dusk. They found nothing. It was as though the boy had stepped into the trees and dissolved into the forest. Then, on the 7th day, a ranger stumbled upon a small clue, a bright green dinosaur t-shirt caught on a low branch 2 miles from the picnic site. It was Jacob's favorite. The fabric was damp from rain and lightly torn at one sleeve. Nearby, a faint impression in the mud suggested someone may have stepped there, but no clear footprints. No trail beyond that spot. That was the last sign of Jacob. There were no berries in that area. No water source. No camps. No known predators. The trail that led to the shirt was not well used, and had been searched twice before. No one had seen it. The shirt had not been there earlier. It had just Vico appeared. His parents returned every day for weeks. They left notes, ribbons, a stuffed animal on the tree where the shirt was found. But nothing changed. The forest kept its silence. Some believed Jacob had been taken by a person hiding in the woods. But rangers ruled it out. There was no physical evidence, no vehicles, no eyewitnesses. No one saw a stranger. And how would someone manage to abduct a child in the open in broad daylight without a sound? Others suggested the boy had run off and gotten lost. But Jacob was not a reckless child. He had no history of wandering far, and even if he had, there would be evidence: footprints, discarded items, broken branches. None of that was found, and so the theories turned stranger. One ranger, speaking off the record, referred to certain spots in Shenandoah as silent edges, places where the forest feels different, where the air thickens and sound seems to disappear. He said those spots were not marked on any map. They shift, move, like shadows in the trees. A few of his colleagues laughed off the idea, but others did not. What if Jacob had wandered into such a place? What if some part of the forest swallowed him, not physically, but dimensionally? What if the forest had edges? Not boundaries. Edges. Borders between what is seen and what is not. Between places we know and places we have forgotten how to reach. The Thompson family eventually left Virginia. They could not stay near the place that had taken their son. But they never gave up. Lisa still writes letters to Jacob every year on his birthday. Michael keeps the baseball cap on his desk. Neither of them says it aloud anymore. But they both feel it that Jacob is not gone. He is somewhere close. Somewhere unreachable. Sometimes the forest does not need to roar to be dangerous. Sometimes, all it takes is a minute of stillness. A moment when you look away. A breath held too long, and just like that, someone you love is gone. No cries, no footsteps, just a chair, a cap, and a silence that never leaves. In September 1991, Adam Mason and his wife Linda set out on what was meant to be a peaceful hiking trip through the Great Smoky Mountains. They had visited the area twice before, always drawn to the isolation, the beauty, and the sense of timelessness that clung to the ancient forests. Adam, a civil engineer from Chicago, was rational, detail-oriented, and not prone to daydreams or impulsive behavior. He packed methodically: trail maps, water, energy bars, a first aid kit, and his favorite binoculars for studying rock formations along the trail. Everything was in order. Their destination was the Alum Cave Trail, a well-marked 5-mile route climbing steadily toward the summit of Mount LeConte. The weather that day was clear and cool, with only light morning fog. They began their hike early to avoid the heat. Around 3.5 miles in, near a rock formation known as the Eye of the Needle, they stopped for a short break. Linda sat on a boulder to unpack snacks. Adam wandered just a few feet away, saying he wanted to check out a ledge nearby, no more than 170 feet off trail. He never came back. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Linda stood up and called for him, thinking he had gone ahead. She hiked up the trail, then back down, growing more panicked with each unanswered shout. Eventually, she returned to the parking area and alerted rangers. A search was launched before dusk. What followed was 6 days of exhaustive effort. Rescue teams covered every inch of the trail between Alum Cave and Mount LeConte. Dogs tracked his scent briefly before losing it in rocky terrain. Helicopters equipped with infrared scanned the dense canopy from above. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no misplaced items. Even his binoculars were found neatly placed on top of his abandoned backpack, exactly where Linda had last seen him. It was as if Adam had stepped out of time. Then, on the morning of the 7th day, Adam reappeared. He walked down the same trail he had vanished from, wearing the same clothes, slightly dirty but undamaged. He looked pale, dazed, but not physically harmed. His water bottle was still half full. The food in his pocket was unopened. He had no bruises, no scratches, no signs of exposure. When rangers questioned him, his answers made no sense. He said he had walked to the ledge, looked at some rocks, and turned back. But when he returned, Linda was gone. So he kept walking. But the trail felt wrong. The trees were different. He said he began to feel like the trail was leading nowhere. The turns did not match what I remembered, he said. And the forest did not sound right. It did not feel right. Then the fog came, thick and yellowish, and then nothing. No hunger, no thirst, no sense of passing time, just stillness. He remembered hearing footsteps behind him, but every time he turned, no one was there. I was here, he told the rangers, but I was not here. He could not explain where he had been, or why he felt like only minutes had passed. Medical examinations showed he was perfectly healthy. Psych evaluations revealed no signs of trauma, delusion, or mental illness. He was sane, calm, but something had changed. He quit his job 2 months later, moved to a quiet town in Oregon with Linda, cut off most contact. He told one friend in confidence that he felt like something had followed him back. 12 years later, another man vanished, this time in Zion National Park, Utah. In November 2003, John Bale, 35, set out alone to hike the Angel's Landing Trail. It was late in the season, and the park was quiet. John had experience in mountain hiking, had trained in high-altitude conditions, and was known among friends as meticulous and cautious. He left his itinerary with the park ranger and planned to return by sunset. Around 1:45 p.m., a group of tourists descending from the summit heard a man scream. It came from somewhere to their left off the trail, but they could not pinpoint the source. The voice echoed, then stopped. They called out, but heard nothing more. John never returned to the trailhead. That night, his car was still in the parking lot. By morning, a full-scale search had begun. The terrain around Angel's Landing is treacherous: steep drops, narrow ridgelines, and sheer cliffs. But John had left no clues. No one saw him fall. There were no items dropped along the trail. Search dogs picked up a scent in one spot, then stopped, refusing to move further. Rangers rappelled down cliffs, scanned the canyon with drones, and sent helicopters overhead. No sign. 4 days later, at dusk, John walked out of the woods. He emerged near the base of the trail, 1,600 feet from the point where he had last been seen. His face was covered in dirt, his eyes red and sunken, his shirt torn at the collar, but his body was intact. No cuts, no dehydration. He looked exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. When asked where he had been, John's response chilled those present. I remember leaning over the ledge. I heard something rolling like stones shifting. I stepped forward, and then it stopped. Everything stopped. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the trees. He had no memory of climbing down, no memory of 4 missing days. His watch still showed the time he had last checked before vanishing. His backpack still contained untouched food and a sealed water pouch. The strangest detail came from the forensic team. The soles of John's boots were nearly clean. No clay, no trail dust, no pine needles. It looked as if he had not walked at all. He, too, refused interviews. Moved out of Colorado. Refused to talk about it ever again. 2 men. 2 national parks. 12 years apart. Both vanished in full daylight. Both returned unharmed, unaware of how much time had passed. Both described altered terrain, strange silence, fog, and a sense of being somewhere else. In both cases, no foul play was suspected. No environmental hazard was identified. And yet, the circumstances defied everything we understand about the wilderness. These cases belong to a growing list of so-called displacement disappearances incidents, where experienced individuals vanish under calm conditions, only to return with missing time and fragmented memories. Some researchers have begun to suggest temporary spatial anomalies, localized distortions in time and space. They point to regions like the Zone of Silence in Mexico or the Uinta Mountains in Utah, where magnetic fields behave strangely and compasses spin without direction. While mainstream science avoids such theories, the details remain documented, undeniable, consistent. Adam Mason and John Bale stepped off the trail and into something else. And when they came back, the forest had not changed, but they had. Across 8 disappearances, scattered across decades and miles of American wilderness, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. These were not naive tourists or ill-equipped wanderers. These were people who knew the land. People who understood trails, who respected nature, and who had no reason to leave their lives behind. They walked into national parks with purpose, skill, and clarity, and then vanished. Jason Hall, the ranger who walked into the trees during broad daylight on a crowded trail. Aleph Campbell, whose kayak floated silently near the shore, engine still running, gear untouched. Andrew Holland, who left his car running in the rain with a marked trail on a map that did not exist. Jacob Gray, who left his gear and bike perfectly intact and ended up 15 miles away in a place no one could explain. Jonathan Hill, who vanished while sitting beside his brother, only to leave behind a canteen on an unreachable cliff. Jacob Thompson, the boy who disappeared from a picnic in full view and left behind only a shirt and a cap. Adam Mason and John Bale, both of whom vanished, reappeared days later and could not explain where they had been or how they had survived without food, water, or shelter. In each case, the physical clues are subtle but eerily consistent. Items found placed too neatly. Radios switched off when they should have been on. Belongings stacked in ways that suggest intent rather than panic. In every case, trained dogs lose the scent abruptly, as if it were never there. In many of these locations, GPS and compass readings are said to malfunction. Time behaves strangely, and those who return describe a sense of being somewhere else. This is not just about people getting lost. This is about something deeper, something that defies the laws of logic, weather, terrain, and human behavior. The disappearances do not follow the rules we expect. They do not leave behind the kind of evidence we are used to. In some cases, they leave no evidence at all. In others, what is left behind feels staged, as if left there to be found, and to ask more questions than it answers. The people who vanished were not running from anything. They had homes, jobs, families. They had plans. Many of them were in the middle of everyday tasks when they disappeared, writing in a notebook, adjusting a backpack, checking the shoreline, having a sandwich. The moment before is always mundane. The moment after is pure silence, and that silence is key. Each of these disappearances shares an absence of sound. No cries for help, no rustling, no alarm, just a sudden vacuum. Someone was there, and then they were not. The forests, rivers, and ridgelines seemed to absorb them completely, without struggle, without footprint, without warning. Some scientists point to natural explanations: sudden illness, animal attacks, hypothermia, disorientation. And yes, these things happen in the wild. But not like this. Not to this many people. Not with this level of precision, repetition, and eerie consistency. Others reach for the unexplained. Hypotheses of spatial rifts, electromagnetic anomalies, areas where the rules of time and place blur. They speak of thin spots, locations where the veil between worlds wears down, where you could step a few feet off the trail and find yourself no longer on Earth as you know it. Far-fetched, perhaps. But what is more unlikely, a forest hiding dimensions beyond our understanding, or 8 separate people vanishing under nearly identical, impossible conditions? The truth is, we do not know. And maybe we are not supposed to. Maybe the wilderness holds secrets that are not meant for us. Maybe the silence is not empty, it is watching. Maybe the forest does not lose people. Maybe it keeps them. So what do we take away from all this? We walk trails thinking we understand them. We enter national parks with maps, with rules, with the belief that nature is a known quantity. But nature is not a theme park. It is not tame. It is not designed for us. Sometimes it allows us in. Sometimes it lets us leave. And sometimes it does not. The final lesson is not one of fear, but of humility. Nature is older than memory, deeper than science, and quieter than our loudest theories. It does not owe us explanations. It does not reveal its boundaries. It just is. And in its vast, uncharted silence, people vanish. If you ever feel the trees too quiet, the wind too still, or the trail unfamiliar though you have walked it before, listen. Pay attention. Not everything that disappears leaves a trace. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something in the wilderness that felt wrong? Have you ever lost time, heard a voice, seen a light, felt watched when no one was there? Share your story in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and stay curious, because the forest never forgets, it only waits.